The bride was sent to the wrong ranch, but the little girl clung to her skirt and whispered, "God finally sent you to us." Montana Territory, winter of 1869. The wind carved like knives across the open plains, sweeping snow into angry swirls that buried the horizon. Miles from the nearest town, the vast white land seemed untouched by time, silent, solemn, and cruel. At the edge of that silence stood a woman. Annabelle Sinclair pulled her wool shawl tighter against her throat, boots crunching through the deep snow as she approached the dark silhouette of a ranch house. Her gloved hand trembled as she raised it to knock. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the heavy door creaked open. A tall man filled the frame. His eyes, slate gray and cold as the wind, studied her like she were a ghost. The lines around his mouth were tight. His coat hung open just enough for her to glimpse a worn revolver on his hip and a gold wedding band still wrapped around his finger. Annabelle steadied her voice. "I'm Annabelle Sinclair," she said. "I was sent here by the Missouri Matrimonial Agency. I am to marry a Mr. Carter." The man blinked slowly, then his jaw tensed. "My name is Colt Rafferty," he said, "and I did not order a bride." A gust of wind slammed into her back like a shove, but Annabelle did not move. "There must be a mistake," she said, trying to keep her tone calm. "The letter said this was Red Bluff Ranch. This is Red Bluff, is it not?" "It is," Colt replied flatly. "But there's no Carter here. You've come to the wrong ranch, Miss Sinclair." He turned halfway, ready to shut the door. Annabelle stepped forward. "Please," she said, "there's a storm coming, and the last stagecoach already left for Fort Banner. I have nowhere else to go." Colt hesitated, just a fraction. Then he stepped aside. "You can come in, but only for the night." She exhaled, her body aching with cold and exhaustion, and crossed the threshold. The warmth inside felt like falling into a memory. The ranch house was sparse but solid, stone fireplace crackling, rough-hewn furniture, walls that whispered of years without laughter. She placed her small travel trunk near the door and looked around. A single child's bonnet hung beside a man's rifle. A child's wooden horse sat abandoned near the hearth, and on the mantel, half-dusted, was a woman's portrait. Colt followed her gaze. "She passed 3 years ago," he said stiffly. "My wife." Annabelle nodded softly, then turned back to him. "I did not come here to replace anyone," she said. I have nowhere else to be." He said nothing, just motioned to the spare room down the hall. "You can sleep there tonight. In the morning, I will take you back to Fort Banner." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired, so she nodded and turned toward the hallway. Then, before she could take another step, a sound stopped both of them. Soft footsteps. Out of the shadows of a nearby room, a small figure emerged. A girl, no more than 5 years old, barefoot, in a faded blue nightdress. Her dark hair fell in unbrushed waves to her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, like she had seen something no child ever should. Colt froze. His hand instinctively went to his side, not for his gun, but for steadiness. The girl walked straight toward Annabelle. Not a word was said. And then, tiny fingers reached out, clutched the edge of Annabelle's skirt, and in a voice that had not been heard for 3 years, soft, breathy, broken, the child whispered, "God finally sent you to us." The room went still. Colt's breath caught in his throat. He took a step forward. "Emmy." The little girl said nothing more, but her grip on Annabelle's skirt tightened, her body pressed gently to the warmth of a stranger. Colt knelt slowly, disbelief all over his face. "She hasn't spoken," he murmured. "Not since." He did not finish the sentence. The words were too heavy. Annabelle knelt down to meet the girl's eyes. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently. "My name is Annabelle." The child looked up, lips trembling. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked, barely audible. Annabelle's heart cracked like ice. She touched the girl's cheek. "No," she said, "not tonight." Colt stood in silence, his hands clenched at his sides, eyes filled with something between awe and fear. He looked at Annabelle. And for the first time since she arrived, his voice softened. "Stay," he said. "At least, until the storm passes." Annabel nodded once. But in her gut, she knew. The storm had already come, and she was already inside it. The storm did not break. It stayed heavy over the land, burying the hills in white and sealing the roads in silence. Days passed, but the snow only deepened. Colt did not speak much, but on the morning after Annabel arrived, he informed her she could stay a few more days until the weather cleared. He did not say it kindly, but not cruelly either. It was simply fact. Annabel accepted without question. She had nowhere else to go. The ranch house felt like it hadn't changed in years. Time clung to the corners, heavy, unmoving. On the mantel, the photograph of a woman watched over the room with quiet dignity. Her hair was pinned high, her smile delicate but unsmiling. A thin layer of dust on the frame suggested it had been untouched for months, perhaps longer. A piano stood in the parlor, its surface scratched, keys yellowing. Annabel ran her fingers along the lid but did not lift it. She imagined it had once sung with joy, maybe lullabies. Now it held only silence. In the wardrobe of her guest room, she found a dress still hanging, fine lace, faded blue. The sleeves were stitched with care. She knew, without asking, that it had belonged to the late Mrs. Rafferty. Perhaps Colt had meant to pack it away. Perhaps he could not. Colt remained distant. He spoke in short, functional sentences. He rarely met her eyes. Yet his actions were precise, thoughtful. He added extra logs to the fire before she woke. He nailed down a loose window panel in her room when the wind howled through. He repaired a crack in the kettle handle after seeing her struggle to pour tea. These things he did without a word, as if he were repairing the house for no one in particular. Annabel noticed, and she understood. Emmy, meanwhile, began to bloom like a shy flower in frost. At first, the girl hovered at the edge of the room, never far, never close. She followed Annabel with her eyes, clutching a small rag doll with missing buttons. She did not speak again, not even a whisper, but she watched. One afternoon, while Annabel sat by the window, mending her glove, Emmy placed a folded piece of paper beside her on the table and scurried away. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall man, one woman with yellow hair, and a small girl holding both their hands. Above them, a bright sun, and something scrawled in uncertain letters. "Mama." Annabel pressed the paper to her chest, her breath hitched. The next morning, Emmy brought her a crooked plate of biscuits, half-burned and lopsided. The kitchen smelled of flour and smoke. Annabel thanked her like it was a royal feast and ate each bite with care. Emmy smiled for the first time, tiny, unsure, but real. Later that week, while Colt worked in the barn, Annabel sat outside with Emmy in the brittle sunlight. The girl climbed into her lap and curled there like she belonged. Annabel read to her from a worn Bible she found on the shelf. Emmy did not understand all the words, but she listened. Her small fingers played with the edge of Annabel's sleeve. Inside, through the window, Colt watched them. He did not interrupt. The warmth between them did not chase away the cold, but it built a space within it, a quiet fire that held back the dark. And yet, under every soft moment, there remained something unspoken, something that lingered in Colt's stare, something that trembled behind Emmy's silence. The house was healing, perhaps, but it was not whole, not yet. Colt found the letter by accident. He had been searching the guest room for extra blankets. Annabel had mentioned the draft last night, and spotted the envelope tucked beneath a folded shawl. He should not have opened it. But the paper was unsealed, and curiosity had a way of turning into something else when silence filled a house. The handwriting was delicate, but the words cut deep. Her injuries have healed well enough. She may live a long and healthy life. However, the trauma to her abdomen has caused lasting damage. The likelihood of childbearing is minimal to none. Colt folded the letter slowly, as though it were made of glass. That night the fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the floor. Emmy was already asleep upstairs. Outside, the wind howled through the broken trees. Annabelle sat in the armchair, a shawl over her shoulders, staring into the embers. Colt stood near the window, his arms crossed, jaw tight. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "I found a letter today," he said. Her shoulders stiffened. She did not look at him. "I did not mean to pry," he added, quieter this time. "I know," she said softly. Then, after a moment, "You read it." "I did." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. She finally turned toward him. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed it all, the shame, the hurt, the fear of being seen too closely. "I was a nurse," she began, "during the war. Not by training, just by necessity." Colt sat across from her. He said nothing, only listened. "There was this one boy," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "no more than 8. He was brought to us wrapped in a Union flag. His mother held him like he was still breathing, but he was long gone." Her fingers clenched the fabric of her dress. "Every night after that, I dreamed of his face. And then came the explosion." She touched her side instinctively, as if she still felt the wound beneath her ribs. "They said I was lucky to survive, but the damage was done. I will never have children of my own." Colt looked at her, not with pity, not with sorrow, with something steadier. "You saved lives," he said, "and paid a price most men couldn't bear." She blinked, surprised. "There are scars you can see," he continued, "and others that stay hidden, but I think you've survived better than anyone I have ever known." She looked away, eyes shimmering, lips pressed tight. "I do not want your sympathy," she whispered. "You do not have it," he replied, "only my respect." Their eyes met in the flickering firelight. For the first time, she felt seen, not as something broken, but as someone whole in her own right. The silence that followed was no longer uncomfortable. It was something else entirely, something honest, something human. She smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. Colt nodded once, slowly. In that quiet room, with winter howling outside and memory pressing in from all sides, a fragile thread stretched between them, thin but real. It was not yet love, but it was no longer distance. It began with a drawing. Annabelle found it folded beneath Emmy's pillow while changing the bedsheets. The child had taken to drawing often now, crude sketches of horses, stick-figure families beneath yellow suns. But this one was different, darker. She opened the paper slowly. The lines were jagged, frantic. A small figure, a woman, stood at the edge of the page, her arms outstretched. Near her, a looming shadow, tall and thick-armed, dragging the woman away. Beside them, another figure lay on the ground. Above his head were 3 crooked words, scrawled in clumsy handwriting. "Pa is asleep." Annabelle stared at it for a long time. That evening, she brought it to the parlor where Colt was oiling the hinges of the back door. She waited until he finished, then held it out without a word. He took it, looked once, and slowly sat down. "She draws a lot," he said, voice flat. "But not like this," Annabelle replied. He nodded once, more to himself than to her. There was a long pause, the air between them chilled. "I've never asked," she began carefully, "what happened to your wife?" Colt said nothing at first. Then he set the drawing aside, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. "I was drunk," he said, "that night." His voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "There had been an argument earlier. I do not even remember what about. She went upstairs with Emmy, and I stayed by the fire, drank more than I should have. When I woke the next morning—" He stopped. Annabelle leaned forward gently. "What did you wake to?" Colt's eyes were hollow. "Blood. On my shirt. On the floorboards near the back door. My wife was gone. So was her coat." He rubbed his temples with both hands. "The sheriff came. Asked questions, but there was no body, no note. Just gone. They ruled it a disappearance." "And you?" she asked softly. "They said she ran off. Others weren't so sure." Annabel watched him carefully. "Do you believe you hurt her?" His jaw clenched. "I do not know." Silence fell again, heavier than snow. "I've tried to remember," he said. "I've prayed for dreams, flashes, anything. But there is nothing. Just the hangover and that damn blood." Annabel swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" Colt looked up at her finally. "Would you have stayed if I had?" She had no answer. Later that week, when Colt took the wagon to town for supplies, Annabel made her way on foot to a nearby cabin tucked at the edge of the woods. It belonged to a woman the townsfolk had mentioned, a widow named Mrs. Hargrove, said to be half blind but sharp as winter air. Mrs. Hargrove answered the door with a shawl wrapped tightly around her bones and a long scar down the side of her neck. She peered at Annabel with one good eye. "Colt Rafferty's woman, are you?" "I am staying with him," Annabel said cautiously. "I have questions." The old woman grunted. "Don't we all?" Annabel explained what little she knew, about the drawing, about the blood, about Colt's lost memory. Mrs. Hargrove listened, rocking slowly on her heels. "That night," she said finally, "I heard something, a scream, around midnight. But my husband was already dead by then, and I don't go looking for trouble in the dark. Next morning I saw footprints in the snow, leading from their place down the ridge." "Just one set?" Annabel asked. "Two," the woman replied, "but only one returned." Annabel's heart skipped. "You told the sheriff?" "Sheriff was Colt's cousin, didn't want scandal, told me not to talk. So I didn't." She looked away, voice softening. "But I always felt that boy deserved the truth, even if he was too broken to look for it." Annabel stood in the doorway, wind brushing her cloak, mind spinning. Footprints. A scream blood Colt could not explain. And a child who remembered more than anyone thought. The past was not dead. It had only been sleeping. The snow did not let up, but something inside the house began to thaw. Each day brought small, quiet changes. Emmy laughed now, soft little chirps like wind chimes in spring. Annabel taught her how to thread a needle, to pull the thread gently through cloth without tugging. Their first project was a handkerchief. The stitches were crooked, the pattern messy, but Emmy beamed with pride when she finished the first flower. Colt watched them from the doorway one morning, arms crossed, leaning slightly against the frame. He said nothing, but Annabel noticed the way his shoulders lowered, the set of his jaw relaxed. Later that afternoon, he took Emmy outside. The sky was a pale gray bowl above them, flakes drifting steady like feathers. He lifted her onto the back of a chestnut mare, slow and careful. Emmy's legs dangled far above the stirrups, but her grin stretched ear to ear. "This one's gentle," Colt said. "Her name's Lark." Annabel stood at the fence, gloved hands resting on the worn wood. She watched as he walked beside the horse, one hand on Emmy's back, guiding her in a slow circle around the yard. Each time Emmy passed by, she waved. "She trusts you," Annabel said when they returned. Colt helped the girl down, brushing snow from her cap. "I guess she knows when someone's worth trusting." That night the wind howled harder than before. A full blizzard settled in, and the windows trembled against the storm's breath. When Annabel stepped outside to bring in a forgotten bucket, the cold caught her throat like a slap. She wore only her shawl and a thin scarf. Before she could return inside, Colt appeared behind her. He reached without a word, pulling his own thick coat from his shoulders and draping it over hers. "You'll freeze like that," he murmured. Their faces were close. Too close. Snow clung to his lashes, to the brim of his hat. His breath curled in the narrow space between them, warm against her cheek. His hands lingered as he adjusted the coat's collar, fingers brushing her neck. Annabel looked up at him. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were tired, maybe, wounded, but open in a way she had never seen before. "Thank you," she said, voice nearly lost to the wind. He nodded once, then turned to open the door. Back inside, they stood near the fire, the coat still wrapped around her. Emmy was asleep in the rocking chair, her doll resting on her chest. The storm outside was merciless, but the room glowed golden. "I met her at a fair," Colt said suddenly. Annabelle looked up. "My wife. Her name was Eleanor. She wore blue, always blue, even in winter. She used to laugh at the way I walked in boots, said I looked like a stiff ox." Annabelle smiled gently. "She sounds strong." "She was," he said. "She kept this place alive long before I knew how. Taught me how to cook, how to hold Emmy without panicking. I was no good at babies." His smile flickered, then faded. "I still wear this." He lifted his left hand, showing the ring. "Because I'm afraid, if I take it off, I'll forget the sound of her voice." Annabelle reached out slowly, carefully. Her hand came to rest over his chest, just above the heartbeat. "Maybe," she said, "she wants you to remember something else now. Not just her voice, but the way she loved you, and how much you still have left to give." Colt swallowed hard. "I do not know how," he said. "You do," she replied. "You already are." His hand hovered just beneath hers, not touching, but close. The storm raged outside, fierce and unforgiving. Inside, the warmth between them held, fragile but real, and for the first time since she arrived, Annabelle did not feel like a guest in this house. She felt like she had been waited for. The snow had begun to melt. Days grew longer, though the air still bit with winter's breath. Inside the house, the quiet routine of newfound warmth carried on. Annabelle's stitching, Colt's repairs, Emmy's laughter in the yard. But peace has a way of warning, just before it breaks. One afternoon, while Colt was tending to the horses beyond the southern fence, a rider approached the ranch. Annabelle stood in the doorway, shielding her eyes from the sun, as the man dismounted. He wore a dust-covered coat, a battered hat pulled low. His boots dragged with the weight of distance, but something about his posture was familiar, too familiar. Annabelle stepped forward cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man removed his hat. Beneath it was a face weathered by years, but unmistakable. Hard-set jaw, eyes like rusted nails. "Name's Danner," he said. "Used to work this place a few years back. Heard Colt Rafferty might still be living here." Annabelle nodded slowly, throat tightening. Emmy had come to the doorway beside her, small hand wrapped around Annabelle's fingers. But the moment the girl saw the man, her entire body stiffened. Then she turned and bolted. "Emmy?" Annabelle called. But the girl was already inside, vanishing down the hall. Annabelle turned back to Danner. "He's out by the south fence," she said tightly. Danner nodded once, then began walking. Inside, Annabelle found Emmy curled beneath the bed in the guest room, her tiny frame shaking violently. She knelt. "Sweetheart, what is it?" Emmy didn't speak. She simply grabbed a piece of charcoal from the nearby sewing table and frantically drew on the wooden floorboards, fast, desperate strokes. Annabelle watched. A woman, a child, a man with a blade, blood, the same shadowy figure from Emmy's past drawings. Annabelle's heart pounded. She stood and made for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, but before her hands reached it, the doors slammed open. Danner, his eyes found her with eerie calm. "She remembers, don't she?" he said. Annabelle stepped back. "You killed her," she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She wasn't supposed to be there. Neither was the kid. But your man, Colt? He was too deep in drink to see straight." He stepped forward, pulling a knife from beneath his coat. "Can't risk her talking now." Annabelle's hand darted for the rifle, but he was faster. He knocked it aside, sending it clattering across the floor. She turned, trying to run, but he caught her by the arm. A scream burst from her lips as he shoved her to the ground and raised the knife. Then a blur. "Emmy." The child darted from the hallway, screaming in pure terror. "No!" Annabelle twisted, throwing herself between the man and the girl, just as the knife came down. The blade cut deep. She collapsed, blood blooming across her bodice. "Annabelle!" Colt's voice roared from the doorway. The crack of a rifle shattered the air. Danner stumbled backward, clutching his side. Colt advanced, gun still raised, face a storm of fury. He kicked the knife from the man's reach and knelt beside Annabelle. Blood soaked the floor. "Stay with me," Colt said hoarsely. Annabelle's eyes fluttered. Emmy crawled beside her, sobbing uncontrollably. Then, through the choking gasps, came the sound that shattered everything. "Mama!" Emmy screamed. "Mama, don't go." Colt froze. Tears streamed down the girl's face as she clung to Annabelle's arm. Outside, neighbors drawn by the gunshot began to arrive. One of them, a former deputy, recognized Danner immediately. They called for the sheriff. It did not take long for the truth to unravel. With Emmy's trembling testimony and the neighbor's recollection of the scream years ago, Danner was arrested. Colt gave his statement with a hollow voice. But nothing mattered more in those hours than the fever that followed. Annabelle drifted in and out of consciousness, her skin pale as moonlight, her breaths shallow. Colt barely left her side. He sat through the nights, mopping her brow, whispering her name, begging her to fight. Once, when the fever broke briefly, she stirred. Her eyes met his. "You stayed," she whispered. "I never should have let you get hurt," he choked. She smiled faintly. "Worth it, for her." From the doorway, Emmy tiptoed in. She climbed onto the bed beside Annabelle and gently placed a damp cloth across her forehead, mimicking what she'd seen Colt do. Then, looking at him with eyes far older than her years, she whispered, "She's my mama now." And Colt, broken, breathless, could no longer deny the truth in that. He leaned down, brushed Annabelle's hand to his lips, and said, "You saved us both." Annabelle stood at the window long after the fire had died, watching snow fall in quiet spirals outside. The wound across her ribs had mostly healed, but the ache inside her had only grown. She could not stay. Not after everything. Not when she could never give Colt what his wife once did. That morning she sat at the kitchen table and wrote with a trembling hand. "Dear Colt, you have given me a warmth I thought I'd never feel again. But I am not whole. I cannot bear children, and you deserve more than what I can offer. You and Emmy need someone who can give you a real future, not just pieces of one. Please know that I love you both, but love is not always enough." She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the mantel beneath the photograph of Eleanor. Then she turned to pack. Upstairs, Emmy stirred from her nap. The house was quiet, too quiet. She crept down the stairs in her socks, doll clutched in her arms. That was when she saw the letter, her name scrawled in the second paragraph, right after the words, "I cannot be her mother." Her chest tightened. Emmy did not cry. She simply turned, walked back up the stairs, pulled on her boots, her scarf, and slipped quietly out into the snow. By the time Annabelle noticed the front door ajar, the wind had begun to pick up again. Panic clutched her chest. She raced upstairs, calling Emmy's name, tearing through rooms. Nothing. "Colt!" she screamed, rushing outside. "She's gone!" He had just returned from the barn and dropped the saddle in the snow. "What do you mean she's gone?" "She read the letter," Annabelle said, eyes wild with guilt. "She thinks I'm leaving because of her." Without another word, Colt ran to the barn. He saddled the mare with practiced speed and hoisted Annabelle up behind him. The storm was coming in faster than they'd feared. White swallowed the horizon, tracks in the snow already blurred by the wind. They searched the riverbed, the tree line, called until their throats were raw. "Emmy!" Colt shouted into the wind. "Emmy, come back!" But only silence answered. Then, just before nightfall, Annabelle spotted a splash of blue between the trees. He slid off the horse before it stopped moving. There, huddled beneath a gnarled pine, lay Emmy, arms wrapped around her doll, cheeks pale, eyes barely open. "Baby," Annabelle choked out, falling to her knees. "What have you done?" Emmy's lips trembled. "You don't want me anymore." Annabelle pulled her close, cradling her with shaking arms. "No," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the child's. "I was never leaving you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong." Colt knelt beside them, wrapping his coat around them both, his hands trembling. "Don't you ever run from us again," he said, voice cracking. You're our little girl, nothing changes that. Emmy's small arms reached up, locking around Annabelle's neck. I want you to be my mama forever, she whispered. And Annabelle, crying now, held her tighter. Then I will be, she said. Forever, if you'll have me. Colt's hand found Annabelle's, squeezing it in silent agreement. In the middle of the snow-covered forest, with the wind howling and the past finally behind them, a broken family was made whole again. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was blanketed in fresh white. Trees bowed under snow, and the air was still and cold. Inside, the house stirred gently, fire crackling, soup warming on the stove, and the soft hum of life returning after a long, hard night. Emmy lay curled beneath a quilt beside Annabelle, her small fingers twined with hers. She had not let go since they found her. Colt stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the horizon. He looked tired, but different, lighter, resolved. After breakfast, he asked Annabelle and Emmy to take a walk. They bundled up, stepping into the snow together. The sun had returned, casting golden light over the frozen world. At the creek, Colt stopped and turned. I've been thinking, he said, about what makes a family. Annabelle waited, heart already full. He pulled a small velvet pouch from his coat. Inside was a ring, worn, simple, and trembling slightly in his fingers. I wore this too long, he said, holding up his left hand. Then he slowly removed his wedding band and held it in his palm. She's gone, and I loved her. But loving her doesn't mean I stop living. He looked at Annabelle, his voice soft. Emmy needs a mother. And I need you. Tears welled in her eyes. Family isn't about where we come from, Colt said. It's about where we choose to stay. Then he dropped to one knee. I choose you, Annabelle Sinclair. Will you marry me? She didn't answer with words at first. She dropped to her knees beside him, arms wrapping around Emmy, who had followed close behind. I'm sorry, Annabelle whispered to the child. I'm sorry I made you think I didn't want you. Emmy clung to her. I knew you did. I just got scared. Annabelle turned to Colt, her hand still resting over Emmy's. I was sure I'd missed my chance to be part of something whole, that I was only good at leaving. Colt reached for her hand. But you stayed, she said, and so will I. She nodded, tears trailing down her cheeks. Yes, I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger, his wife's ring, now carrying a new promise. 1 week later, the church in Fort Banner opened for a quiet wedding. The townsfolk filled the pews, offering warm glances and quiet blessings. They had heard the story, how Annabelle had bled to protect a child who had not spoken in years, how Colt had found peace in the woman he never expected. Simple wildflowers lined the aisle. Colt stood at the altar in his best shirt, visibly nervous. Then the doors opened. Annabelle entered in a dress borrowed from the town seamstress, hair pinned with sprigs of lavender. But it was Emmy who turned every head, walking proudly in her blue dress, scattering petals with the joy only a child could carry. When the preacher asked who gave the bride away, Emmy spoke without hesitation. I do. Laughter filled the room. Colt's eyes filled with light. After the vows, after the kiss, and after Emmy threw her arms around both of them, the three walked out together into the sun, no longer bound by grief, but united by grace. That night, as the fire crackled low and Emmy slept peacefully between them, Annabelle stared at the ceiling with quiet wonder. She whispered, just once, I wasn't born to be a mother, but I was called to become one. And in that house where so much had been lost, something finally found. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the chill of a Montana winter, the warmth of a love hard earned, and the power of a little girl's first word, then you are the reason we tell these stories. Here at Wild West Love Stories, we believe that even in a world of silence, sorrow, and snow, love still finds its way. From a forgotten war nurse, to a grieving rancher, to the small footprints in the snow that led them home. This wasn't just survival. This was the story of choosing family and becoming what you never thought you could be. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable romances from the American frontier, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Hit the bell so you never miss a love that defies time, blood, or boundaries. Because some families aren't born, they're chosen, with courage,